Good evening, and I say thank you all for being here in the last session. We are discussing today research partnerships between industry and academia, and I think that we are discussing research partnerships between industry and academia, and I think if you look at all different levels of interaction, perhaps research is at the pinnacle. That is, after you've done everything else, then you start talking about research, because I mean, in some sense, that requires the most intense collaboration and cooperation. So I thought I'd just give a brief overview, and the points I want to make briefly are: one, that in fact now both the scale and quality of research being done in the diverse range of universities and IITs and so forth in the country is of a quality that can actually benefit industry. The second point that I'd like to make is that in fact industry is also very keen to carry out R&D to become more competitive. We heard this in the previous session also. And finally, I'd like to just mention that, how can we actually, what are some of the examples by which we can cooperate? So this is from a report produced by the Royal Society, which says that in fact, if you look at industry today, the value added, the gross value added is what is shown here, by knowledge intensive services and high tech manufacturing has become a very significant part of the total gross value added. So it may be as much as 40% in manufacturing in the advanced economy. So just in some sense knowledge is becoming more and more important, and really all companies are realizing this to a great extent. And one thing that was really an eye opener for me was that there's this big company called Foxconn. They were deciding where to set up their next plant in India, and after they visited our institute, saw the labs, talked to the faculty and so forth, they decided to set up close to IIT because of the possibilities of interaction with the university. So I think many of the big companies are now realizing that not only is R&D important, but close interactions with capable institutions can also be beneficial. And these are very large companies. This one is some 130 billion, and they are planning to make over the years a $5 billion investment somewhere close to Maharashtra. And it's not just the engineers who came. The chairman of the company came and himself visited the institute. So really there is a great case for this kind of interaction between institutions and industry. So now let me just say a few things about, just to supplement what the previous speaker said about R&D in India. One is that we are spending quite a lot in India. So even if you say we are spending 9.9% of GDP, well, if you look at the actual number, if our GDP is around 2 trillion, that means we are spending $18 billion in R&D, and that's a huge. It's like 1.2 lakh crores or something like this number. That's a big amount that's going into R&D. If you look on a PPP basis, the number is much larger, but I don't know if that is relevant, and we are almost one of the top nations, 8th in the world in terms of R&D spending on a PPP basis. So there is a lot of investment going on, and of course there's output. So this is that Thomson Reuters report, and this actually shows a comparison of the BRIC countries, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China and Korea. So there's BRICK out here, and really this line that's shooting up out of the graph is China. So this is the kind of thing, and in fact you can just see the kind of investment that they are making. if we are making, let's say, 30 billion, 36 billion in investment, China is 337 billion on a PPP basis, and US is 400 billion. So that is the sort of contrast. But, in spite of that, India is in this crowd of lines going up, and it is since 2005 onwards, there has been quite a sharp increase in the output in terms of research publications. And then you can look at citations and then calculate some kind of impact of so how important are these publications, and I won't go into the details of this, but this graph essentially shows in different fields what is the percentage of our share of the world output. So the more you're on that side, the more you're publishing, and if you go upwards, then it tells you what is the quality of the publications in terms of how well they're cited and so forth. And so they've made 4 quadrants. So in the best quadrant, which is high rate of publication as well as high impact, you see engineering, physics, materials, and chemistry. But in this quadrant, and that is again quite important, you see clinical, medical research, neuroscience, immunology, genetics. So on the medical side, that we are doing quite. And one freak thing is that in psychology we are doing extremely well in terms of citations, but almost 0 papers out there. So there is significant output and there is significant quality output that's coming. Another type of output is the number of patents that we file, and here this is an area of concern, and that's really what Professor Chandrasekhar mentioned, that we are doing a lot of research and that is coming out as papers, but translation is low, and one reflection is that we are actually filing quite few patents. Again, that graph, we are somewhere down there in one of the lines below, and China is that one which is shooting up to something like 400,000 patents a year. So we are still quite far behind. And there's another very interesting thing about patents, which is also there in this Thomson Reuters report, that we are patenting very selective areas. So you can't read these things, but this black line that you see with very sharp, that is India. And it turns out that most of our patents are in 2 areas, and that is fine chemicals and pharmaceuticals, and we are very low in everything else. So that is also another point to make, that there is a lot of R&D going on. Much of it is not in the sort of commercial space, but where there is a lot of good R&D in commercial space is in these 2 areas of fine chemicals and pharmaceuticals, and certainly the rest of industry can emulate what they are doing in terms of commercialization. So if you do a summary of what Shubhra said and what I have been saying, is that currently we are small but significant player in the global R&D space, but we are growing, and even relative to others we are growing. I didn't show this data, but private sector share of R&D is only about 34%, whereas global benchmarks industry R&D is about 65 to 80%. So I think that is one big difference. And then one thing that is good is that we are quite frugal, that is we are spending about 2% of the global expenditure of R&D, but our outputs are about 4% in terms of publications. I have been saying that we are now entering a new era for R&D in India, and there are projections that our R&D expenditure will increase, and it was, I think, in the 12th plan, which I don't know if it's still there, it was mentioned that it will go from 0.9% to 2%, and if we go to 2%, that is a huge investment that will be made, and it was expected about 50% of this 2% will be coming from the private sector. So we can anticipate that even if it doesn't go to 2%, there is going to be a significant rise in the amount of money going into R&D. A patent regime has become quite effective, and one evidence is that about 750 multinational corporations have set up their R&D units in India, and they are based on Indian talent. That is, our PhD students are the ones working in all these companies. If you look at many academic institutions, then they have very good capabilities and facilities. There is this concept of technology-based startup companies that has come. And then of course there is a focus on innovation. We are actually living in the decade of innovation. From 2010 to 2020 has been declared as a decade of innovation by. To achieve all this, I think that it is critical that we have very strong partnerships between industry and academia. And really, if we want to build these partnerships, one thing the university side has to demonstrate is expertise in the area of interaction. We must establish some research facilities so that the interaction becomes fruitful. And then we must internally have governance and a support framework for things like IP and legal and so forth, so that we can actually execute significant projects. And I think this is something that universities need to look at if they want to do significant things in this space. There are many examples, and I can give some examples where we have been interacting with industry, but I would say that one big area we would say that industry academia interaction would be in the area of entrepreneurship, where we actually generate new companies, and many companies are coming out of the institute. This is another sort of example where there is a deep partnership with a company. A 10-year long partnership has been going on, and really it spans a lot of things. Like the company has donated equipment, they do sponsored projects, they have student internships, they have training programs, and also there are many regular meetings to make sure that this collaboration stays on track. Another quite large collaboration that is going on is with an industry consortium related to aerospace components, in which Boeing, DST have started this consortium, but many other companies have joined. And the whole idea is to actually work on projects of direct interest to the companies, and almost all the research that is carried out in the center is actually sponsored by the industry, and the industry has a say in which projects are taken up. So let me just conclude by stating a few things that we need to do in this new, which I think is a very promising time for R&D in India. One is that at the university level we must focus on basic research, fundamental research at the PhD level. So we really should train our students to the highest level in the particular field. And really for these students, the partnership we seek with industry is for placement, because the best way of transferring this high level of knowledge and technology is if the student moves from the university to the industry, and I think this is the easiest thing. So if industry is getting into R&D, then recruiting of PhDs in a systematic way would certainly be one way of partnership. The other thing is to actually come up with ways of mobility, that is having industry people spending time in the universities and university people spending time in industries, and some formal mechanisms for this should come up. The third thing is sponsorship of PhDs, and that can be done through the PM scheme as well, where the project is defined by industry. Again, this involves a greater deal of interaction. Another one is sponsored research, where a particular set of problems or a broad area needs to be investigated, and this could be sponsored as a research project in an industry, or shorter term projects could be given as consultancy projects. I feel this area of startups is a great way for this connection between institutions and industry, because in some sense the industry is born from the research that is done in the university, And finally, I think something that is of a larger scale to make a bigger impact, and this is going on all over the world, is to actually develop large centers of excellence where you have sufficient investment. And here I feel it is something like, again, what Professor Chandrasekhar was saying, where we have university, industry and government together working in a specific area, perhaps some area like, let's say, electronics, hardware, or one can think of many other things where there is a joint work going on, but there's significant investment so that the results that come out are also significant. There are already examples. We have the US-India Clean Energy Centers in which industry and academia are participating with industries from India and the US, and also universities from India and the US. And I think that is a good model, and we should have some of these large centers which are set up, which can produce research of a high level and also products which will make an impact. So thank you very much for your attention. And